Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you a surprising and exciting story. Let's meet Elowen Fairmont, a young woman who faced death when she drowned in a lake and was taken to a spiritual realm where she discovered shocking truths about life and the universe. What she experienced on the other side will completely change the way you see the world. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any incredible content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this transformative journey full of revelations. On that sunny June day, everything seemed perfect. The Asheville sky was painted an intense blue, without a single cloud to disturb the horizon. The trees surrounding the lake swayed lightly in the breeze, creating dancing shadows across the green grass. I was surrounded by my closest friends, celebrating the approach of graduation and the end of a stage that seemed so big for us teenagers, ready to face the world. Nathan Caldwell, my best friend since childhood, was particularly excited. He always had a way of turning ordinary situations into unforgettable adventures. "Elowen, come on. I bet you can't get to the platform before me," he challenged, pointing to the floating structure in the center of the lake. His mischievous smile was impossible to ignore. "Oh, really? Prepare to lose," I replied, laughing as I took off the t-shirt I was wearing over my swimsuit. He laughed too, but his eyes made it clear that he took the competition seriously. Other friends encouraged us, shouting words of encouragement as we positioned ourselves on the lakeshore. When Nathan counted to 3, I dove into the water hard, feeling the shock of cold run through my body. It was much colder than I expected, but that only increased the adrenaline. My focus was on the platform. My arms cut through the water with determination, and my mind echoed only the thought, "I can win." As I walked further, I heard my friends' laughter, and the sounds of the surrounding nature fade away. The water seemed deeper, more isolated. The platform was close, but my body started to show signs of tiredness. It was then that I felt a sharp twinge in my legs, as if invisible ropes were squeezing them. I tried to continue, but the pain only increased. My legs went still, heavy as stone. "No, not now," I thought. As I started to lose strength, panic took over. I tried to float, but I felt like each effort was just pulling me further down. In a moment of desperation, I raised my hand, waving frantically at Nathan and the others. They laughed and waved back, not realizing that something was terribly wrong. My body started to sink. The water around me grew colder, and the sound of the world above began to fade. What was once laughter and life was now silence and darkness. The only thing I knew for sure was that I was alone. As my body sank, despair took over me. The water felt like a cold, unforgiving embrace, squeezing me tighter by the second. My mind was in complete chaos. I can't die like this. Not here. Not now. But try as I might to fight, my legs were useless, and the desperate movements of my arms only seemed to accelerate my descent. I could feel the cold increasing as I sank. The sound of the world above slowly faded away, until all that was left was my heart beating like a drum in my chest and the muffled echo of my own scream caught in my throat. The bottom of the lake was closer, and the aquatic plants began to touch my feet, curling around like icy fingers trying to pull me further down. My body shook uncontrollably. Please, please someone help me. My mind screamed, but the only sound that came out of me was a faint gurgling as the air escaped my lungs. My hands touched something muddy, and I realized I had reached the bottom of the lake. There was nowhere else to go. I was completely submerged, surrounded by a darkness that seemed to swallow me whole. For a moment I thought about trying to use my hands to propel myself up, but the mud was thick and sticky. The more I struggled, the more I seemed trapped. The panic was now absolute. My lungs burned like they were about to explode, begging for air. The cold of the water was beginning to be replaced by numbness, and my mind entered a state of confusion. And is this how it ends? It was at that moment, at the height of despair, that something inexplicable happened. In the midst of the silence and darkness, I heard a voice. It wasn't an ordinary voice, as if someone was standing next to me. It was as if she were inside me, but at the same time around me, filling everything. "Relax. Let go. You need to relax and let go." My first reaction was resistance. "No, I need to breathe. I'm going to die." The voice, however, remained calm, patient, like a friend guiding me through the storm. "Relax. Trust. Everything will be fine. Something in me started to give way. There was no more strength to fight. I decided to believe that voice, even if it was my last act. When I thought the word let go, all the heaviness and panic disappeared. I felt strangely light, as if something had been detached from me. In an instant, I was no longer tied to the bottom of the lake. It was then that I realized something extraordinary was happening. The cold, the pain, the despair, everything disappeared. I looked down, and to my absolute shock, I saw my body. He was motionless, sitting in the mud, but I no longer felt any connection to him. It was like looking at an object that didn't belong to me. What was happening? I didn't know, but for the first time in minutes, I didn't feel afraid. Everything around me was silence and darkness, but at the same time, there was an inexplicable calm. The panic that once dominated me completely disappeared, as if it had been ripped from within me. I floated, weightless, cold, painless, just existing. My body, which once seemed to be all that I was down there, motionless at the bottom of the lake. It was a surreal sight. For the first time, I saw myself as something separate from my physical body. And then the voice came back. "You're fine now. Trust the process." His tone was soft but firm, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. It wasn't a male or female voice. It was neutral, but filled with an inexplicable heat. I didn't know where it came from or what it was, but somehow it felt familiar, like an old friend you haven't seen in years but who never stopped knowing your soul. "What is happening to me?" I asked, although I didn't know how I was saying it since I couldn't feel my mouth or my body. But my question was heard, and the answer came immediately. "You are safe. Trust. Now follow me." It was at that moment that I realized that something was changing in the space around me. In front of me, a point of light began to appear, small at first, but gradually growing, until it turned into a glowing tunnel. It was unlike anything I could imagine. The light was not just visible, it was something I felt. She radiated warmth and love, filling every bit of whatever I was in that moment. "Follow the light," said the voice, and without hesitation I was drawn to it. There were no more doubts, fears, or resistance. Every fiber of who I was wanted to go into that light. As I approached, I felt a gentle breeze on what felt like my face. Even though I wasn't sure I still had one, there was something incredibly comforting about that feeling, like the light was welcoming me back home. As I moved through the tunnel, I noticed that the walls around me were vibrant, pulsing with colors that don't exist in the physical world. It was as if the tunnel was alive, breathing with me. The voice was always there, gently guiding me, but now it seemed quieter, as if it wanted me to just experience the moment. "Where am I going?" I asked again, feeling a mixture of curiosity and peace. "Where you always belonged," the voice replied, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. At the end of the tunnel, an incredibly bright light waited. It was no ordinary light. It was as if she had life, as if she were an entity unto herself. She called to me, not with words, but with an attraction so powerful and loving that it was impossible to resist. And for a brief moment, I understood something I didn't yet know how to explain. This light knew me, not the physical I, but the real I, and she was welcoming me back. As I approached the light at the end of the tunnel, the world around me completely transformed. It was no longer just a dark tunnel with a distant light. It was now a vibrant space, pulsing with energy, colors, and emotions that I could never have understood before. The walls seemed to be made of living particles, glowing and changing color as if they were the breaths of a living entity. Everything seemed to be welcoming me, as if I had been expected for a long time. Every step, or movement, because I wasn't exactly walking, felt incredibly natural. There was no effort, just the feeling of being carried by a gentle current. The air around me, if it could be called air, seemed filled with love and peace. It was as if every particle around me was vibrating with acceptance, something I had never felt before, not even in the happiest moments of my earthly life. The light in front of me kept growing, getting brighter and brighter. However, contrary to what I would imagine, it didn't hurt my eyes. In fact, I wasn't even sure if I still had eyes. I could see her with something beyond the physical senses, something much deeper and more intrinsic. As I got closer, I started to notice details that weren't there before. It wasn't just a uniform light. It had a texture, as if it were composed of trillions of luminous particles, each pulsing with its own energy. It was almost like watching a moving galaxy full of stars, but with a presence so alive that it seemed to be calling me directly. "Continue," said the voice, now more subtle but still present. "You're going where you always belonged." As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a light. It was something conscious. She knew I was there. She knew who I was. It wasn't a judgment or an analysis. It was complete acceptance. And for the first time in my life, I felt what it meant to be completely known for something, and yet loved without conditions. It was then that I realized there was something more. Behind the light, shapes began to reveal themselves. They were small, like glowing dots, but there were billions of them, each emanating its own energy. They seemed to greet me, as if to say, "Welcome back." It wasn't a verbal greeting, but something I could feel in every part of my being. "Who are they?" I asked, almost not knowing if I wanted the answer. The voice responded with overwhelming simplicity. "They are you. They are all. You are connected to each one of them." Upon hearing this, something inside me changed. It wasn't just an explanation. It was an understanding that invaded my being. At that moment, the light became even more intense, as if it was opening up to me. I was overcome by such a sense of peace and belonging that I thought, if this is the end, then there is nothing more perfect. As I continued to move toward the light, I knew something transformative was about to happen. Every fiber of who I was felt like this was the beginning of a journey that would change everything. When I finally crossed the threshold that separated the tunnel from the light, I found myself in a completely different space, something that I cannot describe with earthly words. It was like being inside an immense sphere, without beginning or end, where time had no meaning. All around me was filled with bright, living energy. There was no floor, ceiling, or walls, just an infinity of light that enveloped me like a warm hug. Soon, I noticed that the space around me began to change. Small lights, similar to movie screens or televisions, began to appear in all directions. Hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of them, each projecting different scenes. I was frozen in awe as I tried to understand what I was seeing. Little by little, I realized that those screens showed moments from my life. One of them caught my attention immediately. It was a childhood memory when I was about 8 years old. There I was, playing in the backyard, laughing with my little brother while our parents watched from a distance. But something was different. I didn't just relive the scene. I felt every emotion I had experienced at that moment. The childlike joy, the pure and simple love for my family. It all felt so alive, so intense. And it wasn't just that. I also felt the emotions of the people around me. For the first time, I understood my parents' protective love and my brother's innocent affection. It was as if I was inside them all, experiencing their perspectives. "You can feel the impact of your actions," the voice explained. Every moment he lived, every choice he made, created ripples that affected those around him. I was drawn to another screen, which showed an argument I had as a teenager with a close friend. There I was, shouting words that, in the heat of the moment, seemed justified. But now, reliving it, I felt her pain, as if it were my own. It was as if I was inside his mind, experiencing the impact of every word I spoke. I felt his broken heart, his sadness and the hurt he carried for days. I never realized how much this affected her, until now. "There are no judgments here," the voice continued, sensing my distress. "This is not a punishment. It's an opportunity to understand and grow." With each screen, I was transported to different moments, not just in this life, but in other lives as well. It was as if time didn't exist and all my experiences were connected, part of something much bigger. I saw how every action, no matter how small, made an impact, like small stones thrown into a lake, creating waves that expanded infinitely. The realization that hit me was overwhelming. We are all interconnected, each thought and action affecting the whole in ways we never imagined. This understanding brought a mixture of pain and beauty, but most of all, a deep gratitude. Every experience, no matter how insignificant it seemed, had a purpose. As I floated in that space, taking in everything that was being shown, I noticed that the light, which was still shining brightly, seemed to be waiting for me. I knew something even bigger was coming. After revisiting crucial moments in my life and even other existences, the light in the center of that infinite space seemed to be calling me. There were no words, but the feeling of attraction was irresistible. Everything around me vibrated with loving energy, and my essence seemed to be guided towards this source of light. It was as if every particle of my being knew that this was the final destination, the place where I came from and where I would always return. As I got closer, the light began to change. She was no longer just a distant, incomprehensible glow. Now it had a shape. It was like a silhouette, a figure without a face or gender, but radiating a presence that seemed to contain all the love in the universe. It was welcoming, familiar, and at the same time overwhelmingly powerful. It was like being faced with something greater than I could ever understand, but which, paradoxically, made me feel completely at ease. As I got closer, a feeling of indescribable warmth enveloped me. It wasn't a physical warmth, but something that filled my soul, as if every part of me was being purified and renewed. It was then that I heard, or rather, felt the first words coming from the light. "Don't be afraid." Those 3 words penetrated every corner of my being. All fear, anxiety, and doubt instantly disappeared. It was as if I had never known the concept of fear. I felt as safe and protected as a child in the arms of a loving parent. Before he could fully process it, the light spoke again. "I love you." These words were much more than just a statement. They were like waves of unconditional love that went through every part of me. For the first time, I understood what it was like to be completely and absolutely loved, without judgment or expectations. It was a love that didn't depend on anything I had done or stopped doing, something pure and eternal. It was at that moment that I realized that there were other lights around the large central light, billions of them, small and bright, like stars dancing in harmony. They all seemed to vibrate with the same energy, and suddenly, they spoke together in a voice that seemed to echo throughout the universe. "Welcome home." I felt a shiver run through my essence. Those words were spoken with such profound intensity that my entire being seemed to resonate with them. It wasn't just a greeting. It was a recognition of who I was in my entirety, something I had never experienced on Earth. I was, literally, at home. The billions of lights enveloped me in a silent, graceful dance, as if they were celebrating my arrival. At the same time, the greater light seemed to observe me with indescribable tenderness. It was impossible not to cry, if that could be called crying, because the emotion was stronger than anything else I could contain. "You have always been a part of us," said the leading light. "Always will be." I knew it wasn't just an individual experience. In that moment, I understood that each one of those lights on each piece of energy around me was part of something much bigger, and at the same time, it was part of me. It was the most profound truth I had ever experienced. There was no separation. Everything was one. My essence trembled with joy. I wanted to remain there forever, merge completely with that light, and never again leave that home that had been mine since the beginning of time. But somewhere inside me, I knew there was still more to experience and understand before reaching this final stage. As I floated in that immensity of love and belonging, something incredible happened. The light began to expand, as if it wanted to completely envelop me. There was no rush, no imposition. It was like a silent but irresistible invitation. Every piece of who I was felt like this was the next step, joining something much bigger, something that had always been waiting for me. The great light in front of me seemed to pulse with divine energy, and the millions of small lights around it began to move in harmony, like stars being drawn towards a gravitational center. I knew I was part of it. The desire to surrender completely took over me. There were no doubts, fears, or any hesitation. It was as if everything in me was crying out to return to that state of oneness. Then, I felt the light envelop me. It wasn't something physical. It was a complete fusion of essence. I became part of her, and she became part of me. It was as if the light was a great ocean and I was a drop that was finally coming home. There was no separation. I was neither greater nor less than the light. We were one, inseparable, infinite. In this state of fusion, I realized that all the knowledge in the universe was at my disposal. I didn't need to ask questions because the answers were simply there, accessible, clear, unquestionable. It was as if my mind had expanded beyond what I could imagine, absorbing the truth that everything in the universe is connected, that there is no beginning and no end, only endless cycles of energy, love, and existence. The feeling was indescribable. I was everything and nothing at the same time. It was like being the entire sky, with every star shining within me, but also like being a grain of sand in the vastness of an infinite beach. It was a peace so profound that it seemed to transcend anything I had ever experienced. And above all, there was an overwhelming love, a love that filled every fragment of my essence and made me understand that this love was the essence of everything that exists. While I was in this state of unity, a profound realization came over me. Life on Earth, with all its pains, joys, and challenges, was just a play, a game for us to learn and grow. It was no less important for that, but it was temporary, an illusion meant to teach us about love and connection. It was then that I realized that even though I was completely absorbed by the light, there was still something calling me back. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was like a small rope pulling my attention away from the perfect fusion. The light, as always, seemed to understand what I was feeling before I could even express it. "You still have more to learn," the light transmitted, its energy filling my consciousness. "It's not time to stay yet." I didn't want to accept it. I didn't want to leave that state of perfection, that home that seemed to be mine since the beginning of time. But at the same time, I knew there was truth in those words. My heart, or whatever my essence was at that moment, felt like there was something unfinished, something that needed to be done. "Why can't I stay?" I asked, not in anger, but with genuine sadness. "Because your time on Earth is not yet over," the light replied, with such gentleness that it almost erased my resistance. "You went to learn, to live, to share, and what you experienced here, in this light, needs to be taken there." I was in a dilemma. Part of me wanted to beg to stay, but another part of me understood that somehow this journey wasn't complete yet. And then, before I could say anything, I felt a shift in the energy around me. Something was about to happen. While I was still merged with the light, something started to change around me. It was as if the vibrant, welcoming energy that surrounded me began to move. It wasn't a physical movement, I wasn't being dragged or carried, but a smooth transition, almost like floating on a river made of pure consciousness. The light seemed to be taking me somewhere, and although I didn't know exactly what was happening, there was no fear, just a sense of quiet expectation. Suddenly I realized we were traversing what I can only describe as dimensions. It was as if layers of the universe were peeled away one by one, revealing hidden secrets beyond what the physical senses could ever perceive. Each dimension we crossed was different. Some seemed to be made of colors so vibrant and complex that they don't exist on Earth. Others were vast fields of pulsating energy, like infinite waves of sound and light. In each of them, I felt an indescribable connection, as if I were part of everything I was seeing. "This is all part of who you are," the light communicated to me, its voice sounding like a soft echo inside my mind. "You are connected to everything, everywhere. There is no separation." With those words, a deep understanding came over me. I began to realize that my life on Earth was just one facet of something much bigger. It wasn't the entirety of who I was. It was just a role I played in a cosmic play. Every moment of joy, pain, love, or loss was a small piece of the puzzle that made up my larger existence. "But why does life on Earth seem so real?" I asked the light, feeling a mix of curiosity and fascination. "Why don't we remember that when we're there?" The answer came immediately, clear and simple. "Because that's how you learn. The illusion of separation is necessary for you to understand the value of connection. Every life, every moment, is an opportunity to remember who you really are." Those words hit me like a wave of absolute truth. Everything made sense now. Life, with all its challenges, was not a punishment, but a gift. Every interaction, every choice, was a chance to grow, to experience, to learn about love in its countless forms. As we traveled, I realized that time, or at least my perception of it, no longer existed. It felt like I had been there for years, absorbing revelations and universal truths, but at the same time, everything was happening in an instant. The light showed me past life memories, times when I was cruel, times when I was kind, and even times when I didn't realize the importance of what I was doing. Everything was connected, like threads intertwined in a cosmic web. "Life is like a play," explained the light, returning to what had been said before. "You and billions of others play your roles, but everyone is on the same stage, acting together. In the end, everyone goes home." I could feel the deep meaning of these words. Every person I met, every relationship, was like a mirror that reflected parts of myself, and yet each of us was a unique expression of the same divine light. It was then that the light began to show me something even more vast. It was as if I was observing the entire universe from an external point of view, Galaxies rotated in sync, stars were born and died, and the energy that connected everything was the same love I felt now. It was impossible not to be filled with a deep sense of reverence. "What about me?" I asked, with a voice that sounded small compared to the immensity I was witnessing. "What is my role in all of this?" "You are a bringer of light," replied the voice. "Like everyone else. Your existence on Earth is a reflection of the greater journey. You were sent to learn, but also to share. What you have experienced here in this light needs to be taken out into the world." As those words echoed inside me, I felt something was changing again. The light was guiding me back, and the knowledge I had gained seemed to be imprinted into my essence. They weren't just words or images. It was a truth that was now part of who I was. At the height of that sublime experience, where every fiber of my essence seemed to be in complete harmony with the light, something began to change. It was subtle at first, like a distant calling. The light, which had welcomed and transformed me, now seemed to be leading me away from itself. The feeling of unity, of being at home, began to be replaced by a slight tension, a different vibration, as if something was pulling my attention elsewhere. "It's time to return," the light communicated to me, gently but firmly, "to go back." My essence reacted with disbelief. I didn't want to go back. I couldn't go back. Everything I was wanted to remain in that state of perfection, of absolute love, of infinite understanding. There, where there was no pain, fear, or loneliness. "Please don't send me back. I want to stay here." "You still have more to do," the light replied, its energy enveloping me in a wave of compassion. "Your time on Earth is not over yet. What you experienced here needs to be taken to the world." I couldn't accept it. The thought of leaving that light, that home, was devastating. "But I don't want to. This is where I belong. Please don't make me go back there. It's not my place." The light was silent for a moment, but it was not an empty silence. It was like she was allowing me to process what was coming. Then, with loving firmness, she said, "You will return, and everything you learned here will be with you. We will never be apart." Before I could protest again, I felt a force push me gently but determinedly. The sensation was like being pulled by an invisible current. The light began to move away, or maybe I was the one moving away from it. The colors, vibrations, and energy around me began to change, becoming less intense, less vivid. It was like I was being unwound back into my old world. As this transition took place, I began to feel something I hadn't felt since leaving my body: heaviness. A density began to settle into my consciousness, something that felt strange and uncomfortable after experiencing the lightness of light. Little by little, I realized that I was being reconnected to my physical body. At first, it was like being trapped in something small and limited, like trying to fit into clothes that no longer fit. Then suddenly it all came back. The cold of the water, the weight of my body, the pain in my lungs. My mind screamed back to the light, but it was too late. When I opened my eyes, the sun was shining above me, blinding and oblivious to what I had just experienced. I was lying on the beach sand, surrounded by my friends. "She's alive," I heard Nathan scream, with tears in his eyes and a nervous smile on his face. "My God, she's alive." I didn't share his relief. Inside, I felt an overwhelming emptiness. My body was there, but my soul still yearned for the light. I began to cry, not from pain, but from sadness at having left what I now knew was my true home. "Are you well?" Nathan asked, holding my hand tightly. "Elowen, what happened? You were submerged. We thought we would lose you." My mind was spinning, trying to find the right words, but everything seemed insufficient. I just shook my head and lied. "I don't remember anything. Everything is blank." Inside, my heart ached for keeping this secret. I knew they wouldn't understand. How could I explain that in just a few minutes? I had experienced something so vast and transformative. How could I put into words what it was like to be absorbed by the light? As they celebrated my comeback to life, I felt like an outsider, not just among my friends, but in the world. I no longer belonged there, and I knew that from that moment on, my life would never be the same. The days after my return were marked by a strange feeling of dislocation. I was back on Earth, in my body, but I felt like something fundamentally had changed. It was like I was a piece of a puzzle that no longer fit where it once belonged. The light, with its infinite purity and love, continued to live within me, but the world around me seemed opaque, colorless, without the same vibration that I had experienced during my journey. That first night, as I lay in bed, the words of the light echoed in my mind. Everything you learned here will be with you. We will never be apart. I closed my eyes, and for a brief moment I could feel that warmth again, that love that transcends anything I had ever known. But the feeling soon dissipated, and I was filled with a deep emptiness, as if an essential part of me was missing. The next day, I tried to get back into my routine. My mother hugged me tightly, telling me how happy she was that I was okay. But something about my reaction surprised her. "You look different, Elowen," she commented, concern in her eyes. "Are you really okay?" "Yes, Mom. I just need some time," I replied, avoiding his gaze. How could I explain to her what had happened? How can I tell you that in a matter of minutes, I had lived what seemed like an eternity, discovered secrets of the universe, and felt a love that nothing on earth could equal? At school, my friends kept talking about the picnic, laughing nervously as they remembered how scared everyone was. "You nearly scared us to death," said Nathan, with a forced laugh. But I couldn't laugh. It all seemed distant, as if it were someone else's memory. Nathan noticed my expression and asked, "Do you really not remember anything, Elowen?" "Nothing at all." I shook my head no. No, it was all a blur. It was the easiest lie I've ever told, but also the most painful. Inside me, every detail of that experience was alive. I remembered everything: the tunnel, the light, the screens, the welcoming words. But the weight of sharing that was too great. I knew no one would understand. How could they? I myself was still struggling to understand. The weeks turned into months, and the feeling of being an outsider in my own life only grew. Every day, it became clearer that I didn't fully belong in this world. The light had shown me that life was an illusion, a play where everyone plays their role, but I could no longer engage in the same story that once seemed so real. Everything seemed small and unimportant compared to the vastness I had experienced. I started looking for answers. I spent hours reading about spirituality, religion, and anything that could help me understand what had happened. My Catholic upbringing, with its rigid rules and inflexible dogma, offered no comfort. What I experienced in the light was very different from anything I had been taught about God, heaven, or the afterlife. The light did not judge and did not condemn. She just loved, unconditionally. I dreamed of the light almost every night. In my dreams, I went back to that place, felt that love again, and each time I woke up, the world around me seemed even more distant. My heart ached with longing, not for the people or the place where I lived all my life, but for the light. That was where I wanted to be, and I knew one day I would return. Over the years, I learned to carry this experience with me, to integrate it into who I was. It wasn't easy, but eventually I realized that the light hadn't sent me back just to survive. She gave me a mission, to share what I had learned. Earth was a place of learning, a place to experience, to grow, to understand love in ways that only separation could teach. Now, looking back, I realized that this experience shaped me in ways I never could have imagined. She gave me a purpose, even if that purpose is still challenging and often lonely. The light showed me that, despite all the pain and difficulties in life, love is always present, even if it sometimes seems hidden. And so, I continue living, not for me, but for what the light taught me. I know that what I experienced is real, and I know that one day I will return home. Until then, I will continue to learn, grow, and share what I can. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.